Reuse happens when people find new ways to use existing things. To go back to Donald Norman, he's got a great quote. He said, the sign of a great design of an object is that people can use it in ways that the designer never really intended. That's the kind of world I would like to live in, where the things that are needed get reused and they get empowered. They get more resource and they get stronger. And the things that aren't needed or the things that are damaging to the system get shunted off to the side. I want to make that's sort of the way I think about democratizing. And I think when you do that, you're back to what we talked about before, which is this idea of allowing people, giving people a big pile and say, go nuts and create something.
Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of the API Resilience Podcast. I'm Mark Winberry. I'm co-host with Christoph Ventoma. And today we have Mike Amundsen, who is an author and consultant, and Christoph says is a luminary in the API scene. I haven't seen Mike's talks at any live conference, but I've looked at them online and they're really good. And we're really delighted to have you with us, Mike. You can follow Mike at MAMUND on Twitter and check out his YouTube channel. Also, MAMUND. So welcome, Mike, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I'm happy to be here. I'm really happy to talk with you and Christoph and talk about the idea of APIs and resilience. So it's really fun to be here.
I'm super excited because whenever we meet each other, we start philosophizing. Yep. So I'm really excited about what's going to happen tonight.
I love meeting all of Christoph's cool friends from the API scene. So this has been super helpful for me. And
all right, I'm a cool friend.
You are a cool friend.
Oh, for sure.
All right. I just want to mention to our listeners that we made the mistake that we've made several times. We got into the conversation before we hit the record button, and that's how I know that you're about to hear some really great stuff from Mike because it was pretty great. Mike, before we jump into things, you're working on a book, I understand.
Yeah, actually, I just received the copy edit edition just yesterday, which is the last step. This is my last chance to alter something before it gets frozen. So the book is called Design and Build Great Web APIs. It's my first book with Pragmatic Publishing, and I'm really, really excited. This book took a lot more time than I thought it would. It's collecting up all the things I've learned about API design and implementation and maintenance and modification over decades of doing this in one form or another. So I tried to put together a book that sort of has a whole story. It starts with API first, and it has a whole section on design and a whole section on build and a whole section on release. And really, it's supposed to be this kind of full cycle journey. I'm very excited about it. I'm really happy. I'm looking over the galleys, and I still think it looks pretty good, which usually by this stage I'm pretty annoyed by whatever I wrote. So I think either that's really good or really bad. Hopefully it'll be out in the next month or two.
Okay. And repeat the title again, please.
It's called Design and Build Great Web APIs.
Excellent. Well, that topic in itself is going to be of interest to our audience because on the API Resilience Podcast, we're trying to highlight various things that API program owners and program managers need to do, especially in these difficult times, to make connecting easier and better. And it just seems very timely that your book's coming out.
Cool.
So this is not your first book, right, Mike?
No, it's not.
How many did you do?
I'll be honest with you. I checked it out recently, not counting short little reports like 50, 60, 80 pages. I think there are 18 books in Amazon.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really too bad.
So I should change the introduction to prolific author.
Or serial author, or inveterate, or incurable. I'll get it right one of these times. I'll keep working on it.
So
I get it.
Do you have any books on this topic we started talking about, on the systems thinking behind APIs?
Oh, yeah. So we were before we hit record, we were talking about this notion of systemic thinking, systems thinking. No, I don't. Actually, to be honest with you, I've tackled parts of this the way that I think about APIs. I've tackled parts of it over and over from several different angles, and I've been very lucky. I say I authored 18 books. I think probably half of them I'm a co-author. I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing people who help sort of give a different perspective to what I see or what I do every day. So I have a book sort of planned in the background, sort of like in my head. Honestly, I have all of these lists everywhere about, that would be a good one. So there is one out there, but I don't know when it will happen.
I've been like standing on the doorstep of maybe I should write something. It's just such a massive time commitment.
So I'll give you the quick answer. Yes, you definitely should write. Definitely, just for lots of reasons. So writing, because I think it's a fantastic way to work on what you're thinking about and to show others. Secondarily, you and I have talked so many times before. I know you've got fantastic things to offer. So I definitely think you should do it. And honestly, it's like so many other things. It's like APIs. It's like so many other things. Don't wait. Start now. And I think it'd be a fantastic experience. I would love to see you writing. We need more people talking about their perspectives on this API space, how APIs work, how you think about them, how they affect others, how they work in a system of APIs. So I would definitely think it's a great idea. And then secondarily, I will tell you, it is a daunting experience. At least it is for me, but I still do it.
I think everybody I've talked with is like, well, what is the worst thing you could think can happen? I was like, okay, double or triple that.
I learned so much from, like, I tell you, like, I've worked with some fantastic authors. One of my favorite people to work with in writing is a gentleman by the name of Leonard Richardson. So Leonard wrote RESTful Web Services, which is a classic book now in the API space. And he and I worked together to write RESTful Web APIs. Honestly, I assisted him in writing RESTful Web APIs. And Leonard has written several novels already. Leonard is a very prolific, very effective, very experienced author. And he taught me so many things about writing. And one of the things I learned from him, I try to remember, is writing is like doing your exercise. You do it every single day. Every single day. And it makes it different. If you treat it as a monumental task, if you treat it as this one-off waterfall experience, it's going to be problematic. But if you treat it as you constantly improve day after day, you make it a little better, a kind of a DevOps, agile kind of feedback loop, it becomes a much, much more rewarding experience. So that's one of the key things that I've learned from Leonard.
I think the book that needs to be written, and I think it's the same book that you're thinking about, is about how APIs are changing the world from this place where we're all separate and like competing with each other, like, where competition is the main driver, to this more collaborative world where, we're still competing, but where cooperation and ecosystems is the main driver. And where instead of having these singular island-like organizations, we have this fabric of interconnected organizations that are constantly adapting and adjusting to each other to create a much more resilient world. But I don't know if anybody's been writing about this stuff yet.
Well, so here's the thing. So what you described is really systems thinking, right? It's really the way the world works. It's really the way so many things already work, and people are writing about that. And I think, like so many things, we talk a lot about APIs as products now too, right? So it turns out people have been designing and building and releasing products for centuries. So I think what's happening to the API space, like so many others, is we're finally taking in all the other elements, product thinking, systems thinking, collaborative work, co-opetition rather than raw competition. All these things kind of come into the sphere. And one of the things, you and I were talking about beforehand is when I work on designing APIs, when I work on a project, when I work on designing some set of APIs, I often adopt the attitude that I'm not actually building a standalone system like you sort of described earlier. I'm actually building a part of an existing system. I'm contributing to the ecosystem of APIs. That's kind of the way the web, the World Wide Web, was designed to work on the internet, right? Is anybody can, publish anything anywhere without asking permission. That's sort of the philosophy that Ted Nelson had. Ted, invented the words hyperlink and hyperdata and hypermedia and all these other things. We surfed the net because Ted was a surfing person, and he said if screens are the future, then keyboards are the surfboards, right? So we adopting that attitude of sort of doing it all together means that we take in all of the world around us. And one of the things that I typically tell people is when I design a set of APIs, I'm designing a set of APIs for people I have never met, to who are going to solve problems that I know nothing about. Right? My job is to create the space for people to do those things. I'm not creating a one-off solution. I'm actually creating an ecosystem. I think that's one of the ways that I think about designing APIs.
So that falls really well in line with one of the things that I've learned as a software development manager and product builder is, so many business people think that the job of the technical team is to go off and produce, this magic, and they can code, which they equate to, knowing a special foreign language or some kind of magic. And what it really is translating those business needs and understanding those business needs into, a flexible solution. And business people intuitively understand this, and so they try to specify the implementation. And so part of my job was always to push back and say, no, explain what you're trying to do. Explain the problem. Don't tell us, give me a thing with a red button here. Because we may have a very different way of doing that might solve your problem better and solve other problems. And so it's really interesting to hear that completely different perspective, but one that agrees with this idea that it's about not specifying the implementation, and that you can screw things up by trying to build your APIs completely to fit a bespoke solution.
Right. And so Donald Norman, who we kind of consider one of the grandfathers of human computer interaction, right? He wrote this book, The Design of Everyday Things. And Donald Norman has this sort of dictum. He says, good designers ask lots of questions. And that's sort of, they say like, well, when somebody says, I need a red button, a good designer says, why do you need a red button? And then, well, because I don't like green buttons. Well, okay. So, why is the button? So they keep asking why, right? And that's one of the things that sometimes frustrates people in the business space is like they say, I just want a thing. And then good designers come back and start asking more questions. And before you know it, you're talking about a much larger canvas than originally. I just need this red button. And that can be frustrating. There's a thing they teach. I can't remember who it was. It's called the double diamond approach, where you start with a simple request and then expands out into a much more complex request. Then you focus that down into the one delivery so that you can actually deliver something. And then you actually, start to expand to build that, and then so on and so forth. So I think you're really describing what all great product managers, what all great designers, what everybody does all the time. And that's that idea of digging just a little bit farther.
But here's, I think, the problem with this fabric space, or this service fabric, or whatever you want to call it. This is also the problem of self-organizing systems or self-organizing teams, is if you go beyond transactional way of working where you say, do this one thing, like we're going to agree exactly what you need to do, and I'm going to give you money, towards going towards a place where you say, well, here's like we're part of this shared thing, and we're going to work together, and we're going to agree that you're going to do the best thing that you can do to further our goal. How do you coordinate? And how do you coordinate in this permissive space where, as you said, like you don't know what people are going to do with your APIs. You don't know, you don't even know who's going to work with your APIs. How do we coordinate the usage of our APIs so that it still is coherent with our purpose of our organizations?
Yeah, I think it's the same way you coordinate with the wildlife that you live with every day. Right? Think about it. We don't have a contract with 99.9% of the world around us. We adapt and we interact with that space, and we do it in a healthy system that exists, honestly, would exist fine without us. It's not really a positive way to think about it. But I think we, honestly, from my standpoint, I think we way oversell this notion of coordination, of contracts, and all these other things. What you can do, of course, is you can build a static model, right? You can build a static model that solves just one problem and then does it well, but it doesn't solve any other problem. If you're going to live in this magical place of reuse, that's not going to work. Reuse happens when people find new ways to use existing things. To go back to Donald Norman, he's got a great quote. He said, the sign of a great design of an object is that people can use it in ways that the designer never really intended. Right? So it's when you find that extra use, when you find what Gibson called an affordance, when you find the ability to use this in a way. Some of us have had this experience. I've had this a few times where you design a system or you design a whole bunch of parts of a system, and then you come back years later and somebody's using it and they say, oh, well, I'll just do X, Y, and Z. And I go, what? Yeah. If you use this part of it and this part of it, you actually get this product out of it. I said, I didn't even know that was possible, right? So when things happen that you didn't know was possible, now you're onto something. And that leads to another thing that we were talking a little bit before we started. And I spend a lot of time reading about creating creative game space, creating play space artwork, art installations where people interact, and so on and so forth. And to me, APIs is very much like this play space or game zone. You're creating all sorts of avenues, boundaries, things that happen. You can't go through walls, but you can walk past them. You can pick things up along the way, but you can't carry everything. You can only carry so much. You need so much oxygen or food or whatever. We design all these constraints in a system and then invite people to participate, invite people to play. Sometimes we even create hidden things and levels and all sorts of other ones. So that to me is API design. Like, how can I create things that has constraints in it that allows people to explore the zone? So I think when we're thinking about cooperative space and non-transactional, not just a simple, I do this, you give me $1, we're zeroed out the balance, right? We don't have to talk to each other anymore. That's not the way you build a healthy system. You build a healthy adaptive system is when you allow people to explore and walk around and learn things and maybe even contribute. Right? That's what Tim Berners-Lee was thinking about when he was thinking about the web space, right? You can contribute. People can add things anytime they want. So I think you're onto that notion. I think that's really important. And we have all of the technical elements, but I think we need the design and the ethos and the experience to actually build what you're talking about.
You had an awful lot there.
But, I talk a lot.
No, it was really good. But part of what I was hearing was really kind of an outline for innovation. And it's, the idea of APIs as an innovation space. And you're producing them. And people are going to, it's almost like, dumping out the Lego blocks and you don't know what someone is going to build.
For years I had on my desk, I had Lego blocks just sort of arranged a little pile of blocks, just arranged, not the buy the kit, the one-off kit, Star Wars,
right.
Starfighter. No, not those. Just the squares and bits and stuff like that, right? For that very same reason, to remind me just what you said. It's like Lego. It's like all these pieces. I really like that idea. I hadn't thought about it in the way you're describing, that it's a sort of an innovation zone. It's almost like inviting people to innovate, right?
That's what I think that's what I heard you going to say there.
Yeah.
With that play space that you don't know what's going to exist. You don't know what affordances will be used in what way to produce something new or might be discovered, which is, to me, is really exciting.
Well, I think it's all about creating. I think it's all about creating that right balance between constraining too much so that people don't have freedom anymore, and constraining too little where people have the freedom to fail. And it's like preventing failure while still allowing for as much freedom as possible. And I think that's what APIs do, is that they narrow the space so that you can be free and you have more capabilities. You get an affordance that allows you to do things completely unexpected because it's so constrained as an interface.
And I just let me just follow up on that a little bit. So I think one of the things you want to prevent catastrophic failure, right? You want to prevent damaging failure, but you don't want to prevent just experimental failure. The times when things, they didn't work the way I expected. That's okay. I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't damage any data. I didn't break anyone else's system. That's what you want to build, right? So that people can fail, because that's really the learning element, right? Is this ability to simply try something out and see if it works, and know that it's safe to do so without hurting anybody. So I think that's a really important part of it. You want to build a safe place to experiment.
I love the way, I think this comes from Neither Ghost Nor Machine, that's based on Professor Deacon's work, where they describe how a cell does this, how a living organism does this. Because there's this misconception that cells have this pre-programmed life cycle that tells them okay, now you're going to, when you hit 5 cells, you're going to do this one thing. And it's not at all like that. It's just, there's the living thing that is doing its stuff, and once in a while some command kicks in that flips a switch and changes it. And the way they described it was that when you run this program, when a new creature is born, when a new living system is born, it starts executing on these things. It starts growing, and if there was some sort of fatal mistake, it's out of the gene pool. And so basically, the system is completely permissive. There's nowhere saying when you hit this, do that. It's not prescriptive. Right. It is just enough boundary to keep you from going into the absolutely bad worst case that's going to kill you. And by doing that, it creates this freedom of life and the ability to innovate and change.
Yeah, that's the adaptive system, right? So when you study organisms, you study adaptivity, and you look at mathematical models that they've tried to use to put these things together, there's always an element that's, you have all of these constraints, all these elements, but there's always an element of chaos. There's always an element of randomness. You look at Stephen Wolfram and all these other things that he's built. He always explores this idea that there's this unpredictable element. There's this unforeseen element in the process. And that's a really important thing to remember when you're designing systems, when you're writing computer programs, especially when you're writing things for the internet. There's a huge difference between writing for one machine and writing for all machines, right? For writing for something that happens in the contained space and time of this one box, and for the time constraints around our globe, and now into space, into interplanetary space. So you have to think differently, and you think in these, like you just said, you think in these ideas of guardrails or constraints, and there is no pre-programmed do this, do this, do this. One of the ways that it was brought home to me was through this idea of studying ant colonies. and ant colonies. We sort of had this imagination that ant colonies have this, everybody's got a certain role in life. That's not how it works at all. They're extremely adaptive, and nobody's in charge. Nobody's in charge. The queen makes more ants, but the queen doesn't direct anybody to do anything, right? So workers and farmers and tenders and all these other things, and they change roles based on need throughout the life of the colony. So APIs are so much more like that, like what you're describing about constraint systems, than they are about sort of one-off problem solving. The same kind of thing that you were talking about, Mark, earlier.
And I think that's the switch. I think this is my last one, and then I'm backing up a little bit. I think this is the thing that we've been doing wrong. Or I think this is the reason why general AI is still very, very far, because our main programming paradigms are prescriptive. They're saying, they're not trying to create an adaptive system. They're trying to predict what's going to happen, like all possible things that could go wrong, and then prevent those failure states.
Yeah.
And it's completely upside out, like it's the complete other way than life actually works. And I think this is the exciting thing, is that we are moving towards computing that works more like life works, so that it can better integrate with society as a whole and help us to deal with some of the wastes that we're having. There's some good waste also, but you need to have some stuff that fails, but there's forms of waste and forms of not thinking inside of the system that are going to kill us as a species, and I think I hope that this fabric that we're building can help us to design a system that's more interactive, more integrated. And that is not just trying to optimize for the local optimum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So where I wanted to go is, if you think about trying to find this right balance of constraint to allow this innovation space to exist, what do people do that's kind of an anti-pattern for that, and what do people do that is an anti-pattern on the other end? Because if you know what those two things to avoid are, hopefully you can kind of set your sights in the middle and get to the right place.
Yeah, that's a great way to talk about it. Like, what are the things people do that aren't working, or what are on either end of the scale, right? On constraints and freedoms, right? So one of the things that I emphasize, and I've spent the last couple of years on, is this idea of designing. When I'm designing an API, I'm actually designing a language, right? I'm designing a series of things that people can use. I'm designing a vocabulary of reads, and a vocabulary of rights, and a vocabulary of properties that people can use to create stories, right? So one of the things I really avoid, and it becomes cumbersome when I'm talking about it to people a lot, I don't have a good way of explaining it, is I avoid designing workflow, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the anti-patterns in my design world is don't design a series of sequential steps. In fact, I spent some time in this latest book sort of giving the trick I have is you don't design a series of steps, you design a series of actions, and they all start from, say, like from a home base. So I'm starting from home, I'm going to go read something and then come back home. Then I'm going to go take the thing I read and I'm going to modify it, and then I'm going to come back home. And then I'm going to go add something new and go back home. So everything is like I have a home base or a play. Rather than design things in a series of steps, there may be a series of actions, but they could be done in a different order. They could be done by different actors in the space. Some of them could be just skipped. Somebody could add new activities in some other order. So when you design workflows, I think that's a big anti-pattern. It's a super fragile item that can break so easily, right? Especially if lots of people have to participate. And that leads, I think, to the other end of the scale. When you think about not designing workflows and that sort of thing, then you have to have something that you commonly share. right? So a lot of times people are designing APIs, and every API is this one-off world that doesn't know anything about any other world and doesn't have any shares in any other world. Well, we know from designing domain-driven design from Evans and lots of other microservice work, there's this thing called this anti-corruption layer, this sort of semi-permeable layer that allows one cell to talk to another cell, that I can pass information from one to the other. There's a translator, literally a proxy, like the way we think of a translator proxy. And we don't, when we work on these systems, I don't think people spend enough time constraining the permeable layer, constraining the interface. So one of the reasons that HTTP works so well is it's a super constrained interface. It's like a dozen methods. Actually, it's more like 40 methods now. People keep adding methods, but we know 4 or 5 really well, right? Get, put, delete, that kind of post, that kind of stuff. Super constraining. There's a name value pair. There's a command line on the top, a name value pair, a space, and then possibly a body, and that's it. That's all HTTP is. Super constrained. But we could build a game. We could build an accounting system. I could write a book. I could collect my friends. I can do advertisements. I can do all that stuff with that same constrained system. So I think those are the ends of the spectrum, right? So don't over-constrain with workflow and other required expectations, sequential elements, and make sure you don't under-constrain to the point that you can't share, that you don't have enough information, that you can't cross a barrier, that you can't move from one step to another. So those are sort of the things I think about. When I create APIs, I'm creating a language, and I want that language to be understood by those people that I haven't met yet. So I think that's kind of the way I think about it anyway.
It's interesting to me because my mind jumps to statefulness versus statelessness. And, I was trying to explain to a friend of mine who, majored in computer science, and before we started the recording, I mentioned that I don't have a degree in computer science. My degree is in mathematics. And so this guy knows a lot more about writing code than I do, but I've been around the block a few more times than him, and was just talking about, the benefits of statelessness, and, trying to carry state with you produces lots of opportunities for failure.
Yeah. And I think I'm not sure if this is where you're going with it, but I think one of the things I've learned in design is the state that I carry is not the state that you carry. So when you and I are talking to each other, you have state in your head, and I use these words, and they have a meaning, and I have a meaning when I use them, but they may not have the same meaning that you're carrying.
Correct.
Right? So state's important, but we share that state when we communicate, right? We don't, there's no magical sort of shared data model in the planet, right? That's not the way it works. We all carry around our own perspectives and our own views. And that's sort of key to scaling the system, right? So if we all have to share the same data model, or have to share the same information, or share the same state, we're not going to be able to scale. We're not going to be able to adapt. We're not going to be able to introduce new things. But if we each carry it, and we share that state with each other over that interface, now we can scale to lots of things, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Go ahead, Kristen.
And it's the state. The state is also constrained, and it's because there is a constraint that you actually have power. Because without those concepts, without states, we would just be, we wouldn't be able to communicate anything at all. We wouldn't be able to think anything at all. And it's very similar how those semi-permeable membranes that APIs are actually creating. So it's you have to constrain the right way, because you can constrain in a way where you are limiting optionality, and you can constrain in a way where you're actually increasing optionality. But I don't know yet what is the difference between the two, and where exactly lies the boundary.
Yeah, to me, that's the experiment, right? So I think that's one of the values of the microservices world. One of the practices of microservices, right, is that it's that do one thing and one thing well, and if you're used and if you're valuable, you'll get reused, right? One of the magics I have in my head, I've never implemented a system like this, is to go back to the gameplay. Is, we all create services that do a certain thing and then do them well, and they maintain their own states, right? We would claim that each one has their own data model, whatever. And the thing is, if you get used often, you get power, right? You get life, you get energy, you get food. If you don't get used, pretty soon you're gonna die. Mm-hmm. Nobody needed that. That's okay. Nobody needed that service. They need another one instead. That's the kind of world I would like to live in, where the things that are needed get reused and they get empowered. They get more resource and they get stronger. And the things that aren't needed or the things that are damaging to the system get shunted off to the side. So, I think we can do these things. None of these are technical challenges. These are design and architectural and philosophical challenges. And they're not simple. They're not, if they were simple, somebody would have done it before me. I don't even have a math degree like Mark. I got music degrees, right? So the way I think about all this is influenced by improvisation and jazz and people I've never met and getting together, and our interfaces, the key change and the songs and the chords. That's all we know about each other. And we can cooperate and collaborate. So there are lots of examples of this, but I think that's the kind of world that I would like to see us get closer to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So we just need one of those. Somebody needs to take a weekend off, build that, and I think we're all set.
Is this what Z is building? With your advice?
What's that? Is you talking about Z?
Epidemic? Yeah.
So that's good. So Z and I have talked about like this for years, and Z helped me with a couple of things. There's actually a protocol. It's one of the first protocols I've tried to design. I tend to design message interfaces. I tend to design message languages like collection JSON and Uber and Mason and stuff like that. But I've actually ventured in the space of protocol, which is interactions, and it's the thing called DISCO for discoverable interoperability between systems, cooperative systems. And Z has sort of picked up on the idea behind that. And he's using DISCO and a version of the ALPS protocol, the Application Profile Semantics protocol that Leonard Richardson and Mark Foster and I created. Now it's like 7 years ago, to try to create a system that's adaptable. And we did a talk in Paris last year where we literally had a design that we described that didn't constrain the methods or URLs, but it did constrain the properties and the affordances. You need to be able to read this. You need to be able to write this. You need to be able to pass these data points. And what we did is we built systems based on this world, and it was for navigating. It was actually, I think it was for navigating or weather, maybe, I can't remember. And we would, in real time, change the URL or change it from a post to a put, or change it from a get filter to several gets. We would do all these changes and the system would never break. So Z is trying to create a resilient system so that we can take humans out of the process of constantly having to rebuild an existing system because somebody else in the ecosystem changed the property, changed the URLs or changed their methods or something like that. Z has got some really, really fantastic ideas in this space. I check in with him every couple of months. He and several other people are working on this project. What does he call it? Superface.
Superface.ai. Yeah. Superface.ai. I just wanted to chime in for people who don't know Z by the letter, which is better than Madonna, we actually command a letter of the alphabet. We're talking about Zdenek
Nemec, yes.
Yeah.
ZDNEKNMEC. And we had him on an earlier episode. So
yeah, that's right. You've talked about this with him. So your listeners are already well versed in Z's version of the new world. Yeah. So yeah.
Maybe, but I just wanted to mention just to make sure if
that's good.
Don't necessarily listen in order.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But if you haven't, I've actually listened to your interview with Z now that you were mentioning it, and I would tell everyone they need to make sure that they listen to that. So that was a fantastic piece.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating.
But it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, because it's a different angle, and it shows you see a bigger part of the picture. And I think
one of the things Z and I are talking about is changes to the protocol or changes to the specification of the semantics, the profile semantics. And I run into this a lot. There are several people who are helping design and improve, especially right now. We're talking a lot about this profile semantics stuff, which is the semi-permeable layer, is the affordances and properties information. And people are saying, well, shouldn't we do it this way? And often I say, well, yeah, you could. I keep things so loose, right? I want to keep things very loose in the sense that I want people to be able to sort of explore the possibility. I don't want to forestall things that might come up. We need to create a system that allows people to do lots of things. I don't know if you know this, John Gall. Have you guys ever read John Gall's Semantics or Semantics? John Gall it's a fantastic book. I think it's from the 1980s in America, and he's got all these sort of dictums and rules and laws and stuff. And one is he basically says loose systems last longer and work better because efficient systems are dangerous to themselves and others. You get so efficiency when you really wring all of the looseness out and you keep it nice and efficient, it's super breakable, right? It's really easy to break. So I am constantly trying to keep things loose and say, yes, you could do that, but you can also do this. Let's see what people do it in real life. And I think that's part of what Z is talking about as well, this idea of letting people experiment in real time. And I think that's where we find the boundaries. When systems fail, when systems fall over, then okay, oops, I guess we shouldn't have done it that way. We got to keep in mind, right? We've only been at this in computing for 100 years. I mean, if you think all the way back to Pascal and all these other things, these early things, maybe 150, right? But evolution and adaptivity and even just architecture, building has been going on for centuries, right? So we have to be kind of patient. We have to experiment. We're lucky that we live in a virtual world where the experiments can be done quicker and be less costly than in the physical world, like when a bridge falls when people are on it, right? But we still have to experiment. We still have to do it, and it's going to take some time. My opinion is we don't have enough information formats. We don't have enough protocols. We don't have enough design models to actually be able to know what's going to work and what's going to work well.
It's interesting. It's like when we're gluing the world together with this information infrastructure, and there's so many new things. Like we're creating this giant superorganism that's like all of humanity in one system, or a couple of systems, maybe, depending on how geopolitics is going to work out. But
there may be more of them. So one of the examples I give is we've been using HTTP now for almost 30 years. Do you think HTTP is going to be around in 100 years? I doubt it. Like all this design work and all this mental work we're doing based on that classic CRUD pattern that is easy to produce in HTTP. Let's not get too overly excited here because we've got a long way to go. And so I think, there may be lots of systems. The internet may not be the only one. Vint Cerf was instrumental in creating a protocol for interplanetary communications. It's sort of like the TCP/IP of the interplanetary space. And I can't think of the name of it right now. It's named after one of the early, advocates for the internet. I can't think of his name. But anyway, do you think about that kind of system where time is so critical, where you're sending messages and it's going to take hours, days, possibly weeks for that message to reach, its intended target? You're not going to be designing computer systems like you do today if you have to think about time in that sense, right? We just have to think about time in terms of hundreds of milliseconds. But when you have to think about them in thousands and millions of milliseconds. We're going to have to design computer systems differently. So we've got a long way to go. We're just at the very beginning of that sort of evolutionary clock for computing.
That's pretty fascinating. You helped me there with something that Christoph had pointed out earlier, the idea that some of the pain that we had with our supply chains in when coronavirus hit was because we had made our systems too efficient.
Yep.
And I said, "Oh, that hurts my agile heart." But when you describe it as the benefits, you didn't say loose coupling, but
right.
When I think of it as loose coupling, then I'm like, oh no, that didn't violate my agile my agile heart. So that's really interesting.
Well, we're always optimizing for something, right? We're optimizing for time. We're optimizing for profit. We're optimizing for people, right? We're optimizing for stability. We're optimizing for resilience. And they're always trade-offs. That's the feature. That's the way it is. And the optimization for today may not be the optimization we need for tomorrow. It makes sense that we spent the last decade optimizing for efficiency and profit. That's fine. But it could be that this disruption, this pandemic, has caused us to rethink what we want to optimize for, right? And that's totally fine too. It's not going to be static over time. You think about all the other sort of plagues and pandemics that we know of in our history, right? In our human history. The Black Death in the 1500s, right? All of a sudden we understood that the conditions for the indigent to the poor, living conditions, would affect how many people would survive, how many people would live, with the quality of their water and all these other things, right? U.S. experienced, the early part of the U.S. in our early history, the late 1700s, we experienced the yellow fever epidemic. And that meant we had a lot of our original founders still alive, Jefferson and Franklin and all these others. And they understood suddenly that the government had a role that to support people in ways that individual communities could not. The outbreak of the yellow fever in Pennsylvania was not the same as the outbreak in Georgia, and so on and so forth. But to develop ways to think about it. Of course, the 1918 pandemic, we're always kind of referring to that, taught us so much about, that's where we get health care. That's where we get preventive care. That's where we get improved housing conditions and stuff like that. The miasma in the air theory, right? All these things. So who knows what we're going to learn from this pandemic, right? What will be the disruptions that historians will point out. But we do this all the time. And that's a great example of a healthy adaptive system, right? We adapt to change. And, not all of us adapt well. I'm up in years, I've got problems. I got challenges. I'm one of those immunologically challenged individuals. There are challenges for me. There are challenges for millions of people, but we adapt. And I think that's what we always do. What we optimize for today, we may optimize for things differently later. And I think that's totally fine.
That's amazingly hopeful. And I'm it's actually a message I needed. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah, it's what keeps me sleeping at night.
Yeah. Good.
It feels that because the speed of innovation has picked up so fast and there's so much more disruptions that like it was interesting what you said, that we're optimizing for something. And maybe, and this is very interesting, because maybe what we need to be optimizing for the future is resilience. It's like, if you're, it doesn't matter how much dollars you own. If your currency suddenly will blow up, then tough.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I think probably even for the wealthy, resilience might become much more important than pure profit. Making sure that whatever you have, that the infrastructure that we have built, that it doesn't evaporate when a new tornado comes by, and creating more resilient organizations rather than purely optimized for growth. I think that might be the new alpha for the worlds of the future.
There are lots of possibilities, right? I mean, we've been doing local optimization for profit for quite a few decades, right? People who are worried about the environment have warned us about optimizing for the local, current mode rather than the long term. People who worry about our health and our obesity have been warning us about optimizing for all of, the fancy food that we have now and how it, what it's for the long term. People who've been optimizing for the ability to own a weapon to protect themselves have been warned that this leads to bad consequences on the whole. People who optimized for just pure profit on Silicon Valley have been warned that there are casualties in all this. Now we have the same thing in health, right? So we always are taught a lesson over and over and over again. The real question is, do we learn the lessons? Do we actually act in a positive way? And do we act in time? And that's really all we have. We have more than enough opportunity to do all that. And one of the things that encourages me, especially in our API space, is that we experience those same kinds of optimizations. Leonard Richardson had this great talk about why hypermedia, the idea of hypermedia style APIs, is not commonly adopted. And one of the reasons he said is that hypermedia optimizes for cooperation rather than for profit. It actually de-optimizes for profit. It de-optimizes for closed systems and optimizes for open systems. And for the last couple of decades, at least, especially on the internet, we have not been optimizing for cooperation. We've been optimizing for profit, for business. And that is, just one of the consequences.
Are we heading into a phase change? Because it feels like...
I think we recognize the phase changes long after they happen, right?
Right.
We don't know it when we're in it, right? We may have already had one, and we're just gaining the perspective. What we could be experiencing could be the fallout from all of the disruption, right? Or we could just be beginning. I mean, I think we have every way of knowing that, right? I think we know locally what's changing in our lives. Like, I'm spending all my time in my house rather than on a plane. That's a super big change for me. Mm-hmm. That's allowed me to work on other things. I don't know if this is really true, but one of the memes that repeats is that one of the reasons that we got the Renaissance is that we finally figured out how to. The people invented coffee, right? We were no longer drinking beer all the time for safe water. We could start drinking coffee, and all of a sudden, people had extra time on their hands. Like, we find all of these odd relations, whether or not they're correlations or causality. So who knows what we're in now? I know my life has changed massively just in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's affected what I work on, and it's affected what I think about. It started, like, to Mark's point, it affects what I think about, what I think cheers me up, what I think gives me hope versus what I was focused on a year ago. So for me, at least, I'm experiencing a big phase change.
And I think that is probably because I want to take one of the fallacies that I see a lot is this either money or, good, being good. Like, you can't go for the social goods if you also want money. Like, you have to choose. It's either or. And that's not right. It's not true at all. It's and. It's resilience is not contradicting a profitable business or even capital accumulation. Actually, resilience might be the best way to do capital accumulation.
Sure. I think, one of the things that you learn, I talked earlier, I have a previous life as a musician. I spent a lot of my time improvising, where you know the basics and you meet people and you play. One of the things about improvising, not on music, but improvising on stage, like improv comedy and all these other things like the Saturday Night Live show in the US and so on and so forth, is this notion of yes and. That's actually the first principle they teach you in improvisation when you're cooperating with people. You always say yes and. Somebody offers something, you don't say no, it's like this. That's not how you improvise together. That's not how you cooperate. You don't cooperate by saying no, you cooperate by saying yes. Right? And that works in so many other ways. There's the original notion of neuro-linguistic programming is from a book called From Frogs to Princes by Christoph and Bandler, I think are their names. And one of the things they talk about is the idea that your language that you use is super important. And when you say but, it's a break. When you say and, it's a connection. Mm-hmm. Right? So just what you're saying about, it's not profit or, right? It's profit and. It's not resilience or, it's resilience and, right? And we choose those things. The way the society works today, the way the computers work today, the way everything works today is because of the choices we've made. And we can choose anytime we want, right? We're not fighting physics here, right? We're talking about social constructs, and we can choose all sorts of ands and combinations.
And I think the key thing is that you don't have to sacrifice yourself for this. You don't have to sacrifice yourself, or we don't have to collectively sacrifice ourselves to get to this better world. Actually, it's the inverse. We are not sacrificing ourselves by going for this collective better world. Because if we keep working in isolation, if we keep believing in survival of the fittest rather than in survival of the sufficiently fit, it's not going to end all that well. So
yeah, and survival of the fittest is a simplistic version of what was really going on anyway, right? Because of randomness and all sorts of other things. It's adaptability.
Yes,
it's the ability to change. It's that hopey changey thing, like that we talk about in the U.S., right? Is this ability to adapt? That's what drives power. We have all sorts of examples where the most effective or the most profitable or the most efficient doesn't work. But it's the one that's adaptable. It's the one that is ready for change. And I think that's a big part of what we have to think about too. One of the challenges in my change of lifestyle over this last 6 months has been my ability to and willingness to adapt. I can mourn losses, and I can spend a lot of time doing that, or I can start to think about, well, what am I going to do instead? Mm-hmm. So I'm not spending all sorts of time on the plane. What am I doing now instead? So I'm not spending all sorts of money on hotels and food out. So what am I doing instead? So these are all opportunities, right? These are all things that are presented to us. And we make those choices every single day. And what's wonderful is I have people in my life who make it easier for me to make choices that enable things. There's all sorts of technology. There are all sorts of communications. There's all sorts of social constructs. I'm very lucky that I can adapt. I wasn't working in a job where I couldn't adapt, right? I was working in a job where I could. So taking advantage of that and then creating other systems that allow other people to adapt, making it easier for others. That's an amazing possibility as well. The ability to design systems where others can solve those problems. People I've never met solving people's problems I don't know about. That's all opportunity we have.
One topic that we've been coming back a lot, or because I'm very busy with it, is this idea of democratization of APIs. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do we take these special powers that I'm actually not a developer myself, so I don't even have those powers, but those special powers that developers have to do these magical interface integrations and all of these amazing things. How do we give that to folks like me who are not developers? I think this is one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot, and I think this is, it's the wave. There's the low code, no code stuff.
Sure.
But how are you seeing that? Like, because it feels like there's a shift happening where we had the first wave of digital transformation, which was about putting down the pipes and the plumbing so that we can see how much money we made in the business, in the ERP system, and all of that stuff. And it's all interconnected now. And now the second wave of digital transformation is the enablement of change. It's like the second order, like a mathematical, it's the second order wave that's happening right now that enables, where we had spreadsheets allowing people to do small things in the first wave. What are the spreadsheets of the second wave?
Yeah, the person who's influencing me most in this space, and I love this space, I love the way you talk about this democratization idea, because that is a theme that I've kind of gleaned from you almost from the first time we've met. The person who influences you most in this space right now is Mel Conway of Conway's Law, right? Mm-hmm. Conway's still alive and kicking, and he is a creative thinker. He's a mathematician, Mark, like you. He grew up in a math background, and he has some wonderful things that he's working on right now. And the way he talks about this democratization idea, is a kind of lowering the barrier of entry. We need to lower the barrier of entry. One of the things I loved about the way the web was implemented by Tim Berners-Lee is you didn't need to be a rocket scientist. You could write some documents and put some angle brackets on things, and then suddenly you were in business. Like, you did not need a lot to get started. You didn't need to have a PhD. And Mel has a much more expansive way of talking about this now. And so Mel, I don't want to mischaracterize his stuff because I've been reading several things by him, but he basically says humans, you use spreadsheet as a great example. He talks about mathematics being something that's been democratized, right? We know how to count. We know how to do simple mathematics. We don't know how to do advanced mathematics, but everybody knows how to do some kind of mathematics. And the idea of a spreadsheet, I think he also uses that example as well. A spreadsheet is one of the sort of the earliest ways to do programming, right? And spreadsheets are very much like it's individual cells that have their own state that influence other cells around them. It's this amazing philosophical model. So Mel talks about this notion of making interaction with computers and computing and connecting these together more like the physical world. He said it should be like making pottery. You should be able to push and mold and press and feel it in your hands, get some kind of feedback right away. So it doesn't take all of this mental acuity, this REPL in your head, this repeat, loop in your head, execution loop in your head all the time. So Mel really talks about the importance of just what you're saying, which is we need to be coming up with sort of another level or another order of computing that is actually not teaching everybody else how to compute, not teaching everybody else how to program, not teaching everybody else the newest language, but teaching them how to use computers in a way that could be physically connected. Maybe they're magnetized or they're glued, or maybe you drag a few things on the screen and this becomes functional. That's all I need to know is I can touch things together and I can get feedback. He talks about the importance of immediate feedback and all these other things. So I love that idea. And well, I'm not really in the same place he is on this. I'm a little bit deeper in the pile, but I also agree in that same idea that I want to make these worlds, these games, these spaces navigable and enjoyable and connectable in that Legos way that Mark talked about. I used to work in a thing called erector sets because I'm an older man, and we had these little metal things that we could sort of build. So I want to make that's sort of the way I think about democratizing. And I think when you do that, you're back to what we talked about before, which is this idea of allowing people, giving people a big pile and say, go nuts and create something.
So what I like about this is an idea that I've been kicking around a little bit is how this resilience that we're talking about in this building of a cooperative, a community that leans more towards cooperation than competition, that resilience is also the place where new value is created because of the thing you were talking about earlier about discovering affordances that you didn't know were there, and the creation of something new. And that something new exists between the person who made the API and the person who discovered the use. And that new value couldn't have existed without both of them. And
yes, exactly.
This is profitable to both of those, and it's it's resilient.
Yep. I love that. I talked about him earlier. J.J. Gibson, the guy who invented the word affordance, who actually had a relationship. They kind of like worked together with Donald Norman because Norman adopted this notion. Gibson talked about affordances just the way you did, which was the idea that the affordance exists between the object and the person. Affordances are not intrinsic in the object, right? So I've got a bottle. I got a plastic bottle of water, so that affords me drinking. It also affords me throwing at you, right? It affords me maybe even starting a fire if I could get a little light in between, get the sunlight between the bottle and onto a leaf. It'll start a fire. So those affordances are what we bring. It's the relationship between. So this idea that like you were talking about, it's like you have to have both of them. You have to have the designer and the producer, and then you have to have the user. You have to have the person who encounters the affordance. So I love that way of thinking about it. And that's another kind of democratization. If we could think about our interfaces, our APIs, as providing affordances in an environment. If we could think about all of the APIs, the ecosystem of the APIs, and here are some affordances over here that are right for my size. Here are some other affordances here that are right for the dinosaur size people, right? I'm not a dinosaur size. I'm a little mouse. I need these affordances. And they're all in the ecosystem, right? And it turns out that the affordances that I use produce content, produce data, produce other things that the giant dinosaur affordances need, right? So it becomes this ecosystem that actually connects with others. Yeah.
There's two concepts there, and we almost need to wrap up, I think. Well, we can. I have more time, but I'm conscious about your time. But two things that I hear here. One thing that I've told recently to customers: the use of data is also data. So if you know who's using what data and what information, that might be more valuable than the information that they're using. This is one. And then the second one is this, and this is a new insight, and thank you for that, is that affordances need to be discovered. And there might be hidden affordances that nobody knows about, just waiting for somebody to bump into them and say, oh, look at that. You can use a glass bottle to make a fire. Who would have thought that? And that's exactly what APIs enable.
Yep.
It's like exposing APIs enables that. It's like having more people looking for affordances, finding unforeseen things you could do with your information or your capabilities, maybe opening up whole new businesses.
Yes, and exactly. That's another principle of gameplay, right? There are all sorts of hidden things in the game, right? And it's your job to find them, right? And there are all sorts of ways. If I have the scroll and the map and the chisel in my kit when I get to this doorway, then suddenly I can do something, right? So there are all sorts of things that we can take advantage of. Now, I'm not saying we just simply treat APIs like they're playing in like some negative connotation of the word play, but play is how we learn, right? And affordances are what make things work together. So yes, I think that's a really, really important part of that. And all the kinds of work that I'm trying to do right now is to create those sort of well-afforded spaces and see what happens, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I think really comes to mind.
I think this leans with Simon Sinek's new book, Infinite Game, which is a follow-on on finite and infinite games. That is a fantastic book.
Oh, that book was so influential to me. I read some of the earliest version of it. So I didn't know that Sinek had like a follow-up.
Yes, he has. So he's making this mainstream now. So games are going to be totally games very soon now. So it's going to be totally okay talking about games.
Oh, I need to put that on my list. Again, this is you and me talking. We need to start a book club. So you'll tell me later, but that's a book that I am going to have to read. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. So anyway, we can keep going forever.
Yeah, this was really, really good. I learned so much from you, Mike, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing with us and all of our listeners. I know that everyone who listens to this will get something from it, and that's really exciting.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, I really enjoy talking about these things, and I really like what you're doing with the podcast and bringing these kinds of topics to sort of everyday life, and sort of helping people figure out how they can act now, how they can act today. You know, we don't need to wait. We have all the technical elements we need. We just need to act. And I love the way you're taking this approach. And Christoph, it's always great to talk with you again. Like someday soon, we will physically be in the same location again, I'm sure. I'm looking forward to that very much. And Mark, it's great to actually put a face now because we're doing this over Meet now, to put a face to the voice. And I'm looking forward to the chance that we would have to meet again someday soon as well.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, cool. Me as well.
Cool. I'm thinking about little saloon, a thought saloon around some of this stuff. And you're at the top of my list. So,
well, I'm sure we'll have lots of other opportunities to do this. I really, really appreciate it. It's nice. So the challenge, a lot of my travel has to do with being with other people, right? It's not to be at a conference or just to do a training session or just to meet with customers, but it's to be in the same city with other people where I get to learn, where I get to listen, where I get to share. And this is helping replace some of that. So I really appreciate the work you're doing on this.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
So I guess this is a wrap, and thanks to our listeners for listening. If you have any comments, please send them to us at Pronovics. We'd love to hear how we can improve the program. You can find us on LinkedIn, and again, you can follow Mike at MAMUND on Twitter, and also on YouTube with the same handle. And so thanks again, Mike, for being with us, and I can't wait to read your book when it comes out.
Thank you.
You've got a buyer already.
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the API Resilience Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please follow us to hear our latest episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments or feedback you would like to share, please drop us an email at podcasts@pronovics.com. Until next time, we wish you well and hope you find success in all your endeavors.